Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Yeah, and again, it leads back to what we talked about earlier on about it's identifying the right use cases and gaining traction, I guess, as well, which is often forgotten about. I mean, and it's something I guess we've learned over the years that if you're just selling to a small group of people, especially an enterprise tool, then you don't have everyone, the key players involved from the very start. Then when you come towards, the first deployment, if you want to say proof of concept, proof of value, then all of a sudden it's, oh, we didn't know about this. What are you using this for, kind of thing? And then the whole thing sort of falls apart a little bit. So it's these kind of lessons, I guess, we've learned over the years that you want to bring everyone in as early as possible and get them up to speed with what the objectives are and how it affects their particular part of the business, whatever that may be. And then that gives you doesn't guarantee success, of course, but it gives you a nice, start. Everyone's on the same page, as it were.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think you're right, because changing mindset, you don't just change people's mindset by talking about it. People need a bit more than just being told, digital is second nature. They kind of need to see it and see the evidence and kind of almost experience it in the areas that they care about to actually shift that mindset. And that's where you get that. Hopefully that's noble. So I think you're very right at shifting that mindset and gaining that maturity and changing the culture is very linked to actually starting doing all of these connected POBs and minimum viable products and actually affecting change into the organization.
Yeah, and I get back sort of the technology side in terms of Azure. Azure. I don't know, it's different pronunciation depending on where you are in the world, but Azure, I call it. But
I don't know. Azure,
Azure.
I don't know if we have a right way of pronouncing it. Probably not. Just whatever way sounds right.
Well, apologies to Microsoft if I'm mispronouncing one of your important products, but no, the question was around how does that product we've seen it with Senseye, which is deployed on that, but how is Azure facilitating the growth of sort of predictive maintenance and maybe other technologies as well, if we want to broaden that a little bit, the deployment, let's say, of those technologies?
I think there are different ways in which it does it, and when you look at the micro level, there are services that help acquiring IoT data. There's obviously services that help and offer additional capability when it comes to analytics and AI. But I think when you look at it from a broader perspective, the real power of Azure is that power of connectivity. And if you look at predictive maintenance, if you're trying to do predictive maintenance on a single machine with the data from a single machine, the scope is limited and what you can do is limited. If you suddenly have or are able to get access to the data, that same machine in 10 different production lines, in 50 different factories, the level of data you can have access to, and therefore the level of accuracy and power of the predictions around predictive maintenance is so much wide ranging. And is enabling that type of thing, and the other thing that it enables is even taking it to the next step, because we're talking about stages, and we received the stage of kind of connectivity and visibility, the stage of analytics, and trying to apply artificial intelligence so you can be more proactive and predictive rather than reactive. And the area where things start really challenging an organizational business model, and if the cloud really helps with that transition, when you can start, and there are a lot of organizations, particularly if you look at it from a machine provider perspective, where they've been able to change their business model because they can do predictive maintenance at scale in their customers, and that relies on cloud technologies to achieve that scale and that connectivity across different factories and different even organizations. Is that where you can start doing things like, for example, changing your business model, changing the way you monetize data, and I think that's the real power that Azure brings, in addition to all of the services to enable a specific solution, let's say.
And is there still debate about cloud, or not debate about cloud? I mean apprehension, and maybe that's a better word, on using cloud as even with someone as big as Microsoft as well, hosting it. Is that still something that comes up in conversations quite a lot about? I know certainly it depends by industry. I'll sort of caveat that. I guess there are certain industries which understandably are more cautious, let's say.
Yes,
about things.
and I think that's the thing. There are certain requirements in certain industries. When you talk about defense in particular, for example, there are certain areas where there are challenges, but there's I think the technology is so mature now that even in those cases there are solutions. So the question is not whether to do cloud or not, but the question is how to do cloud more than whether to do it. So I don't think we really struggle with that question of whether to do it. We know ultimately each individual organization is on a maturity curve towards it, but the solutions are there. You see even organizations like MOD or DoD using the cloud for some of the most critical applications. So it's not, the solutions are there, they're achievable. It's just working up to that level of maturity for each organization, I'd say.
And I guess it should also depend on the type of data being shared, because I think a lot of the time, if I talk about predictive maintenance as an example, the data being shared isn't necessarily got any manufacturing secrets like attached to it necessarily. So sometimes there has to be, again, it's about context around data, I guess is another point. It's and that should help with with a decision about that. But ultimately, if you see success and you want to scale, again, another point we've talked about, what you don't want is for that to be not curtailed, but disruption with that. If you decided to progress with on premise, because that immediately leads to, it's not impossible, but it just leads to a lot more complications that's needed if you had cloud as if you had cloud there instead.
I think there's understanding your data essentially for each organization. This would look different for different organizations, but understanding your data and being able to classify and label data and understand the specific requirements around different type of data is definitely key for an organization to define their cloud strategy and the requirements for hybrid cloud were required. But more and more we see that you really need to have very, very kind of specific requirements to not go to the cloud. But sometimes, there are certain instances where you do need a hybrid strategy.
No, exactly. And I guess what instances would that be? Just as an example.
I think they can be very specific, and I struggle because I haven't really encountered them. There are things like, for example, you don't have the right level of connectivity and reliability of that connectivity to the network, for example. But these days I suppose is an element around how far organizations willing to go to get there. There are technologies out there with satellite technology, for example, or space technology, where if you don't have if you're in a remote area, for example, a desert area, you can still achieve good levels of connectivity. But connectivity sometimes, or reliability of the network is sometimes things that come up. Availability of kind of cloud zones that would enable for top secret data, for example, could be another thing. Sometimes is the certification of certain applications on the cloud, that depending on kind of the providers that you're working on both sides. Those are some of the examples.
No, really interesting. And I guess sort of going slightly broader again, about sort of emerging technologies you're seeing in the IoT or predictive maintenance sort of space. Do you have any that sort of spring to mind that making a big impact?
I think the main one that is a bit of a hype at the moment with generative AI, but that's the first one that jumps to mind, because I think particularly in this space of predictive maintenance, there are a lot of let's say numerical data sources that we have traditionally relied on to do predictive maintenance. But there's also, when you talk to maintenance, there's so much that is on natural language around comments from operators or people who did maintenance and wrote a report around how did they solve a particular problem, or different kind of procedures to solve a specific problem. And I think there's so much natural language data that could add to the richness of predictive maintenance, that with the emergence of particularly large language models, I think that could really bring a huge amount of value, and also reduce, like in other technologies, reduce the time it takes to adopt a technology and the level of skills that the users need, because it's generative AI or large language models are making interaction with technology so natural that is a lot more accessible, and being able to extract insights not just from your numerical data, but things like data records, written records, things like that, kind of more unstructured data, I think will bring a real richness to that sector. But it'll be interesting to see what you think, because you guys are kind of the experts on predictive maintenance.
No, exactly. There's wondering how much I could say about this, but there's certainly work on that side of things to incorporate it into areas of the product. Yeah, because we raise things like cases, and it's sort of summarizing some of those older cases, and there's examples of asking various different questions about the past, and it's because obviously we collect all this data and it's stored there, so it's sort of drawing out some of that even more, and especially as you become more of an enterprise tool, when you want to compare pump over here to pump over here, I think when you can just rather than dive into the history, you can start asking particular questions about why it failed, what led to failure, that side of things as well. So there's some early work going into that, so it'd be interesting to see. Interesting to see where that goes, I guess. And are you seeing, I guess, with other Microsoft partners, etc., they're starting to incorporate, or technology partners starting to incorporate that into their products as well, presumably too?
Yeah, it's been amazing at the speed that some of our partners have incorporated this. This has been amazing. And I mentioned an example with Siemens, where part of the innovation we presented at Hanover Messe this year, the announcement of some of their services in OpenAI was made in January. I think it was April, Siemens was already presenting a demonstrator where through Teams you could access Teamcenter, report faults in any language using generative AI, doing it in speech, and generative AI will help fill in automatically all of the forms, and actually testing the limits of technologies. And what I just mentioned is an actual product, which is really impressive to kind of generate a new product in those timescales. But there are also things that we're doing together with Siemens, we're testing the limits of the technology, and this is not a product yet because there are things that need to be done to enable it becoming a product. But for example, doing things like, could you use generative AI to automatically generate new code for a robot to solve a fault that was reported? So doing the whole cycle from there's someone in Malaysia reporting a fault on their phone to actually goes to the PLM and it decides, well, actually we need to change the process. Let's generate new code for that robot. Off you go. It's downloaded automatically into the robot. The speed of kind of change is amazing, and a lot of those steps is enabled by generative AI. There are other examples, but I think that's a really good example.
Yeah, that's the one that's in current traction, let's say, in the manufacturing. But is it still a case of sort of working out where it can play a role and where it can support still? Because I guess it's so vast and so much potential with it, and obviously there's a lot more to come presumably as well. It's it's almost overwhelming with the amount it can do. I guess in some ways it must be.
Yeah, I think generative AI is still kind of nascent in when it comes to kind of how is it going to be adopted, and there are some use cases that are really clear in quite mature around things like contact centers, for example, or customer interaction with customer interactions that required interfaces with huge amounts of documentation, for example, or summarizing content. But I think we're just at the beginning of discovering what we could do with generative AI. You know, there are reports out there that are publicly available talking about how this could play in manufacturing and what some of the key use cases could be. But I think even that is done by organizations that are really knowledgeable, have done a huge amount of research. I think we're still to discover some of the areas in which generative AI can have an impact in the sector.
And could it, I guess you were talking a little bit about it. Was that Team Senseye you were talking about, the example?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think I remember I saw that demonstration at a Siemens event in Munich a few months ago, which was really, really cool. I'm quite intrigued to see where it goes, but I guess not just in terms of manufacturing and where we are at the moment, but outside of that as well. I guess the one use case of Microsoft, I haven't seen it yet, or maybe I've not got the right version of Teams, is where it summarizes a conversation like we're having here, and then automatically shows like key actions based on what was discussed in the meeting and things like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's I don't really know where instance in this, but is not general access to anyone who would have Teams. So that's part of the Microsoft 365 Copilot. But it is there and it is available, and the users who have access to it can already do that sort of thing.
Yeah, because you can imagine a predictive maintenance use case would be summarizing all of the notes, all of the interactions, all the conversations, all the alerts from the app, and summarizing it into one paragraph or something like that. You can really see that from a purely predictive maintenance standpoint where that would add massive value, especially when you're, again, that word scalability, isn't it? You've got thousands of assets, you're responsible for thousands of assets. You don't want to have to go rooting into the history and look through everything that's happened. You just want a quick summary in there, and that's where it can really make a difference, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think a big part of the value of generative AI is going to be a new use cases that can be unlocked by generative AI. But actually, a huge amount of it is also just productivity. Just do the same thing you were doing before, but being able to do it quicker, less admin. Less of things that we all kind of don't like or would prefer not to do from the jobs that we do day to day, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, from a marketing perspective, we're really start using it not to write case studies, but what it does, it writes in a certain structure, and we ask to do it in a certain structure, and then obviously we add the human element on top to tweak it. And like I say, it's about speeding things up rather than taking over, because if from a marketing perspective, if your whole strategy is around that sort of content, then it'll get you to a certain point. But I think you've got there'll always be that, well, I'll say always, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, as we are now. There requires a unique voice to be added on top to it, of course.
100%, and that's why we use the term co-pilot, and that's why we use it as part of a branding, because all of this is around how can machines and data and digital work alongside humans to make their job easier and just to empower what they're doing and to help where is required. So I think you're absolutely right that we've gone from this idea of let's replace humans to actually, well, this is all around supporting humans in what they're doing and working alongside humans. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, we haven't discussed it. I don't think we've discussed it or raised it yet, but there's obviously issues around sort of skill shortages and replacing, people who retire or leave the industry. And obviously, the idea is to, encourage people to join manufacturers and learn the skills and these new digital skills and everything. But I guess part of that as well, if there is a shortfall, even for a period, that technology can help fulfill that gap.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's an element of how can we use these type of technologies to do more with less when it's not possible to get more resources, but also when the resources are there. I think there's a big thing for me around how can digital technologies drive the careers and really empower people in manufacturing, because people in manufacturing, well, everywhere, have so much potential. There's so much talent in humans, and I think if we can use technology rather than to remove their roles, to uplift their roles and to drive their careers and really get people to get behind digital technology and be the drivers of technology, I think it really can propel and scale what an organization can achieve with digital technologies. Because if you just use technologies to kind of replace people, you're going to lose talent, you're going to lose skills, you're going to lose the people who really know your business and miss out on the ability that they might have to actually define what's the role of digital technologies and shape the role of digital technologies in an organization.
No, definitely. So I'm seeing we're sort of slowly coming to the end, and I want to use my timings slightly off, so it's like rushing it in at the end. But no, I want to sort of give time just to sort of conclude some of the stuff we've talked about today. So if it's okay, I think just to finish, if we maybe, Lina, you could just summarise some of sort of your key thoughts from our conversation, I guess, in terms of people on this sort of digital manufacturing journey. I know they could be at different stages, but just sort of things for them to consider on it as they're sort of progressing through it.
Yeah, gosh, we cover a lot of ground. I suppose some of the key things for me and what we have discussed is, this topic of the progression, and yes, building a data first approach and a data strategy and a data platform, but at the same time as they do that, make sure that they're unlocking use cases and actually using those use cases and the solution to those use cases to inform their strategy in a kind of agile way, I think is really fundamental, and we always try to promote that approach. And I think is that topic that we discussed at the end, I think is really key as well, around the role of people in manufacturing, and the fact that you can well, for me personally, the best way to use technologies alongside humans and is using technology to empower humans, and using those humans to then define the role of technology and actually drive technology and become those champions that you were talking about of technology. The people that you were talking about in this organization, putting together the Senseye Academy, I think it was called. Is that right?
Yeah, school. But yeah, it's fine.
School,
semantics.
The Senseye School.
Yeah.
These are that's the beauty of kind of human talent. That kind of thing doesn't get done by technology. So I think there's a key element around how can organizations have a culture where both things go alongside and are really close together. And it's linked to that mindset we were talking about, that digital is just second nature to everything we do in manufacturing these days.
Yeah, that's a really good way to say it. You're right. Exactly right. But no, I think you're right. We have covered a lot of ground, and as that's why I love doing these podcasts, because I learn so much. But unfortunately, the time goes so quickly as well. It sort of flies past as we're talking.
Indeed, yeah.
But it's really been a pleasure, Lina, to have you on, and to for the listeners and etc. to gain some insight from yourself as well. I guess if they want to sort of follow your content and follow you on, LinkedIn's probably the best place. I'll just put it out there.
LinkedIn is always the first place. If you can reach me there, I'll reply, and we can connect in other ways.
Yeah, no, fantastic. We'll put a link to your profile in the show notes afterwards too, so they'll be able to do that. But yeah, no, it's all that's left to say is thank you everyone for listening out there. Thank you again to Lina for your time. It's been a great conversation. So yes, thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.